Hello, welcome to my machine learning presentation, Ignorant Haiku Machine Presentation by Shauna Enright, yay. It's a little title haiku for you there, hope you enjoyed. I first off started with the idea of doing a project called Dance Painting, which would have involved using the pose classifier on Teachable Machine to outcome kind of colour wash or movement or colour kind of graphics onto the screen when you do a certain movement as part of like a dance. I managed to classify these movements to these labels, and I got a little bit tripped up on just connecting the poses to the canvas, but even when talking to tutors. I think it was also that application of Teachable Machine Pose Trainer is just a bit difficult, but it did definitely help me come to a conclusion and like solidify the fact that I wanted to come up with something that was a visual and kind of fine art outcome. Now that I'm coming to the end of creative computing, going back to fine art, of the machine learning, this was going to be like a moving image kind of painting that I had in my head. But basically I just wanted to bring it back to how my practice usually is, tying in this unit. This comes on to the idea of poetry. I do a lot of writing in my work, and one night I was talking to a friend and my vape had died, and I wrote this little poem for him. Oh no, my vape died, I want to solemnly cry, fallen soldier young, which he seemed to find quite impressive somehow, I guess. And after asking around, I found that what I think is quite easy to do off the top of the head, some people find quite difficult because it's trying to be creative at the same time as having to compute. And even though it's quite basic maths, it's the counting at the same time. It can be a bit difficult. So of course I had that logged in the back of my head of that's quite an interesting idea of humans wanting to be wanting to be creative, but at the same time having to do something that a computer can do really easily. And, even as basic as it is, I was like, that's an interesting idea. Anyway, we go to do Jen's hand classifier lesson, and she had attached several hand classifiers, and I think it was facial expression classifiers as well. Both classification and regression. I went with classification. And just a quick try of this, I thought I would use my haiku idea because I thought this would be a really nice application of it. So as you can see here, here's my first scribbled down notes during the lesson I did. I wanted to show the picture, show the hands. It comes up with a label of that number and pulls a word from a list of that many syllable words. That makes sense. I used a hand tracking classifier and the ML5 hand tracker, and the classifier that I trained gave me these files that I then attached into my code to make sure that the weights were accurate to the 1, the 2, the 3 fingers. Now, the actual training of the classifier, as simple as I thought this would be, turned out to... It's not a hard thing to do. There's definitely harder things to track and classify. But the issue with this is I realised the more I did it, there are so many different ways to do the numbers 1, 2, and 3 on a hand. And let's say you're just doing the one hand, you're right-handed. Let's say you just do the front of the hand. There's 5 different ways to do the number 1, okay? That's easy. You get to number 2, you've got 1, 2, then 3, 4, 5. There's a lot of combinations and permutations of the ways you can show the numbers 1, 2, and 3 on the hands. And then also the position on the screen. When I first started it, I thought I stayed pretty basic, stayed in the middle, didn't think much about the position on the screen. But if a slight point is missing, you could throw the whole thing off. And then it got to me right versus left-handed. How does that work? And then, thankfully, I realised pretty quickly that it doesn't matter if the hand are facing forwards or backwards, because with this tracker, it kind of guesses out where your fingers are in the palm. For example, if this hand is backwards and we only saw the silhouette of this, it would guess that the points were through the palm here. So that was okay. But the problem is, I had a lot of trouble with this. So some of it would be fine, 1, but then 3, fine. That says 2 apparently. That says 3 now, 1. For some reason, and then that would always happen. So I was really struggling. As you can see, I'm at work on my break trying to do this here. I got a little bit violent with the computer, which I'm sorry. Also you in turn as an audience, I suppose. So what I kind of gathered I needed to do was take the original I had of 30 samples, this is per label, so 1, 2, and 3 fingers. So I started with 30 samples. I thought the issue was that there wasn't enough samples, that it couldn't define that properly, didn't recognize it. So I ended up going up to 100 samples. I did every way you could think of on the screen and every possible finger combination you could think of. That was even worse. That was so much worse. Then I went back down to 10 samples. And I thought, I'm going to keep it really basic. And I decided to keep it those middle 3 fingers only. And I did move around on the screen a little bit, but very little. If your ring finger got cut off in a mystery accident, I'm sorry. You're going to have to get the next version of the project where you can use your thumb, because I was losing it slightly with the classifier. I think I classified this about 10 to 15 times, which is really lame to admit, but every time I did it I realized, like, oh, maybe it's this little thing, maybe it's that little thing, let me just redo it, let me redo something. That was probably more times than I need to do, but I until I was happy with the outputs I was getting and that I was really good. And I did have a few tutorials about it, as you may well probably know. On to the words. I want it to be around wide range. My whole vision for this project was I want someone to sit down, stick their fingers up a few times, and that's not good. And basically just come out with this poem that is nonsense. And I want it to really just be a poem because it's a poem and it's in a recognizable structure. I want it to just be a list of absolute words. And I want it to really be a tongue-in-cheek kind of reference to the idea of highbrow poetry, someone being just like, like this is a poem, and it has to be very serious. I don't want it to be very serious. I want it to be literal nonsense. So I wanted big range of words. I did need them to be different word types. I needed to be adjectives, verbs, nouns, because if you just stick with nouns, a list of nouns and thing words, that's just a list. That's not going to be a poem of any kind, and it needs to resemble in some kind of way. And it had to be 1 to 3 syllable words, which I obviously defined ages ago when I was classifying the hands. But just so it has a bit more variation, so it's not just 5 words, it needs to be syllables. This is a very long list of 1-syllable words. I did divide it on the JSON into nouns, verbs, and adjectives, because at one point I was thinking of having some sort of interface where you could adjust the type of word you're inputting. But I pretty quickly got to like the idea better of this very much ignorant haiku machine. I want the machine to have all the control over it. Even though it is random generators, I wanted it. I didn't want the user to necessarily actually have the credit of creating the poem. They just gave the numbers and that was it. This was the 2 syllables, this was the 3 syllables. Now, on to some of the coding. At the beginning, when I first started being able to attach the hand inputs to the word output, I kind of just had trouble with the fact that it would just be constant. And so what I did was I added a timeout, 1 second in between. I played with 2 seconds, but it just seemed a little bit jolty. It kind of just seemed like there was an issue in the code, like it wasn't loading properly. But 1 second just seemed to be that perfect sweet spot, as you could see in the video. And then I've added classifications console log just so I knew where the issues were happening, if that was in the getting the input from the classification or the connecting to the words. So that pause, that stop in between was just kind of what helped me in the troubleshooting. End of the line requires smaller syllable counts. So for example, when you're on 3 or 4 syllables out of 5, you can't do 3 syllable words. So it takes a little bit of trouble. In the corner, there was nothing before, so it was a little bit of a blind watch. Obviously, that just means the user has to count in their head, which kind of defeats the point of the machine. So had that little counter in the corner that I've got to disappear at the very end as well. I, for some reason, was having trouble with picking from the multiple arrays. I didn't feel the need to reorganize my JSONs into one long list of words. I just didn't want to do that. I thought that might be a bit annoying, even though it's not hard. But yeah, for some reason, I was just pulling from nouns for the start when I really just wanted to make sure it got up and working. So to get through that, I just did a random category picker before I got to the random arrays, before going to the random words, to make sure you have that variation in word type. Visuals. Right at the beginning, this is before I got to do the random word type, and I had strings of nouns. I thought, well, if I'm on the idea of machines doing the work for me in terms of creating artwork for a user, taking the credit being the artist, I started plugging them into Comfy UI. So this is an example of that. Same with this and this. I quite like that, pretty basic. I thought it was really interesting, but it's all nouns, so it's very much just kind of cut and paste in and in. Then I've got, this is after I added a button to save the haiku. Design-wise, I've kept it to Calibri font, which is, I don't know, pretty close. It's like the 1x1 unit coding font, and it's also like a typewriter font, which I thought was a really nice crossover design-wise for what the project is about. This is before getting rid of the counter in the corner. But yeah, I just think it's quite basics, which I thought helped shine the really random things that don't make sense. I thought out of with the basic, it makes it seem more random. And then when it makes a little bit more sense, it's kind of classy, you know? And then start plugging that into just kind of AI image kind of adapters and coloring kind of programs. I think the fact that this is quite tongue-in-cheek and a little bit ignorant, like it justifies itself, it just insists upon itself, the poem themselves as a final piece. I just thought it'd be nice to further kind of, I don't feel very insecure at the idea of just continuing to work in on it and in on it and in on it, because even when you've got some sort of kind of trashy output, it kind of just adds back into the topic of is it art just because it's art? Is it a poem just because it's a poem? You know what I mean? It's just, it kind of insists upon itself, and I really like that, and I like the idea of it just being kind of awful and kind of really steering into it. None of these poems are particularly like Pulitzer Prize winning, you know, but I just think it's fun. I think it's really fun. And also in terms of doing all the visuals, it is because I am, like I said, from a fine art background, and I do also, I'm very rarely am able to let writing speak for itself. So I do feel the need to have some sort of visual element to go along with it. I don't like any of these personally, but I just thought it's interesting because it's using the words as shapes rather than words. And yeah, the whole project has kind of become more of a research tool, thinking about how we look at creativity as an artist and how computers are used as a tool alongside it, and how we take credit when really, did we do anything apart from just show numbers on our fingers? But yeah, that was it. Thank you so much. Hope you enjoyed my presentation.